The screams of horses and the roar of earth giving way pierced the night air as Isaac Vaughn threw himself from his saddle. Boots hitting mud, slicked ground just as the entire hillside began its deadly descent toward the valley below. Rain had been falling for 3 days straight across Nevada territory in the spring of 1878, turning the rocky slopes around Hawthorne into treacherous rivers of mud and stone. Isaac had been riding back from checking his cattle when he heard it, that terrible grinding sound that meant the earth itself was moving. Then he saw her, a flash of pale fabric high up on the sliding mass, clinging desperately to a scraggly juniper tree that bent and swayed as tons of mud tried to pull it downward. The woman's fingers were white against the dark bark. Her face turned skyward as she struggled to keep her grip while the world fell away beneath her. Isaac did not think. He ran straight into the slide, fighting against the current of debris and water that wanted to sweep his legs out from under him. Rocks bounced past, some as large as his head, and the sucking mud grabbed at his boots with every step. The woman screamed something he could not hear over the roar, her eyes wide with terror as she saw him coming. The tree groaned, its roots beginning to tear free from the saturated soil. He lunged forward just as her grip failed, his hand shooting through the thick mud to catch her wrist. Her weight nearly pulled him down, but Isaac planted his feet and held on with every ounce of strength he possessed. Mud covered them both, getting in his eyes and mouth, but he did not let go. With his free hand, he grabbed a larger pine tree that still held firm, anchoring them both as the worst of the slide rumbled past. "I have you," he shouted over the noise. "Do not let go of me." Her fingers dug into his forearm so hard he knew there would be bruises, but Isaac pulled, dragging them both sideways out of the main flow of the slide. His muscles screamed in protest, his boots losing purchase twice before he finally got them onto more stable ground. The woman came up out of the mud gasping and sobbing, covered head to toe in brown sludge that made it impossible to see what she actually looked like. They collapsed together on a rocky outcropping as the last of the slide thundered past below them. Isaac's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, his heart hammering so hard it hurt. The woman lay beside him, shaking violently, still gripping his arm like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "You are safe now," Isaac said, his voice rough. He sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. "Can you move? Are you hurt?" She did not answer at first, just stared at him with eyes that were startlingly green even through the mud coating her face. Then she started to laugh, a wild, slightly hysterical sound that bordered on tears. "I thought I was dead. I was certain of it." Isaac helped her sit up, keeping a steadying hand on her shoulder as another tremor of reaction ran through her. "What were you doing up there? Nobody should be out in weather like this." "My horse spooked," she managed, wiping uselessly at the mud on her face. "Threw me right before the ground started moving. I grabbed the first thing I could reach." She looked down at herself and laughed again, this time with a note of genuine humor. "I must look like a creature from the depths." "You look alive," Isaac said simply. "That is what matters." He retrieved his horse, which had wisely stayed back from the slide area, and helped the woman mount. She swayed in the saddle, exhaustion and shock catching up with her now that the immediate danger had passed. Isaac swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her steady as they began the careful ride back toward Hawthorne. "I am Rebecca Gardner," she said after a while, her voice steadier now. "I have been in Hawthorne about a month. I came from California to teach at the new schoolhouse. Isaac Vaughn. I run cattle about 5 miles north of town." He could feel her shivering against him despite the warm spring rain that had replaced the earlier downpour. We need to get you somewhere warm and dry before you catch your death after I just went to all that trouble to save you." Rebecca made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That would be rather poor timing on my part." The ride into Hawthorne took nearly an hour, the muddy roads making travel slow and treacherous. By the time they reached the main street, Rebecca was leaning heavily against Isaac's chest, her earlier adrenaline completely spent. He took her straight to the boarding house where she had mentioned staying, causing quite a stir when he carried her through the door looking like they had both been dredged from the bottom of a river. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, took charge immediately with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. She shooed Isaac out while she and two other women helped Rebecca upstairs to get cleaned up and into dry clothes. Isaac stood in the parlor dripping mud onto the floor, suddenly aware that he was creating quite a mess himself. "You can clean up in the washroom out back," Mrs. Patterson called down. "And do not even think about leaving, young man. I want to hear exactly what happened." Isaac did as he was told, scrubbing the worst of the mud from his skin and clothes in the small washroom. His shirt was torn in 2 places, and his hands were scraped raw, but he had escaped relatively unscathed. He thought about the moment when Rebecca's hand had slipped, how his heart had nearly stopped as he lunged to catch her. If he had been even a second slower, or if his grip had failed, she would have been swept away into the churning devastation below. When he emerged, Mrs. Patterson had hot coffee waiting, and a stern look on her face that reminded him of his own mother. She listened to his account of the rescue with increasing horror, interrupting several times with exclamations about the foolishness of being out in such weather, though her eyes were kind when she looked at him. "That girl has had nothing but bad luck since she arrived," Mrs. Patterson said, shaking her head. "First, the school board tried to refuse her position because they decided a woman teacher was not appropriate, never mind that they had hired her by letter. Then her belongings were lost when the stage company mixed up the shipments. And now this." She patted Isaac's hand. "But I would say her luck has turned, having someone like you nearby when disaster struck." Rebecca came downstairs an hour later looking like an entirely different person. Clean and dry, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her dark hair braided and pinned up. She was beautiful in a way that made Isaac's breath catch. She had a scrape across one cheekbone and her hands were bandaged, but she was smiling as she entered the parlor. "I owe you my life," she said directly to Isaac, coming to stand before him. "I do not know how to even begin to thank you for what you did." Isaac stood, suddenly feeling awkward and very aware of how rough he must look even cleaned up. Anyone would have done the same, but they did not. "You did." Rebecca's eyes were serious now, intense in a way that made him unable to look away. "You risked your own life to save mine. That is not something I will ever forget." Over the next few weeks, Isaac found reasons to come into Hawthorne more often than his ranch strictly required. He told himself it was just to check on Rebecca's recovery, to make sure she had settled in properly after her ordeal. But the truth, which he was honest enough to admit to himself, was that he could not stop thinking about her. There was something about Rebecca Gardner that drew him in, a quick intelligence in her eyes and a determination in the set of her jaw that spoke of strength beneath her refined exterior. Rebecca, for her part, seemed genuinely pleased to see him each time he appeared. She had won her battle with the school board through sheer stubborn persistence, and now taught 15 children of varying ages in the new schoolhouse on the edge of town. Isaac sometimes saw her walking with her students, pointing out plants or insects, turning even a simple walk into a lesson about the world around them. "You are good with them," Isaac said one afternoon when he had offered to walk her back to the boarding house after school. "The children, I mean. They listen to you." Rebecca smiled, adjusting the books she carried. Most people underestimate children. They are capable of understanding so much more than we give them credit for if we only take the time to explain things properly. She glanced up at him. Rather like how most people underestimated me when I said I wanted to teach on my own in Nevada territory. My family was horrified. You came anyway. I did. I wanted something more than what was being offered to me back in San Francisco. A quiet life as someone's wife, hosting dinner parties and managing a household. She said it without rancor, just as a statement of fact. There is nothing wrong with that life, but it was not the life I wanted. I wanted to make a difference, to do something that mattered. Isaac understood that desire more than he could easily express. He had come to Nevada territory 5 years earlier with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from his grandfather. The ranch was everything he had worked for, carved out of difficult land through sheer stubbornness and long hours. It was not much yet, but it was his, and that meant everything. They began to spend more time together, falling into an easy companionship that surprised them both with its naturalness. Isaac took Rebecca riding on the gentler trails around Hawthorne, teaching her to read the land the way he had learned from years of working with cattle. Rebecca shared her books with him, and they spent long evenings on the boarding house porch discussing everything from poetry to politics, to the best way to repair a fence post. "You are not what I expected when I first came here," Rebecca admitted one evening as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red over the distant mountains. Everyone spoke of the West as rough and uncivilized, full of dangerous men with no culture or education. Isaac leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. Disappointed, pleasantly surprised. She looked at him steadily in the fading light. "You are one of the most genuinely good men I have ever met, Isaac Vaughn. That day in the mudslide, you did not hesitate. You did not stop to think about the danger or what it might cost you. You just acted." "I could not stand by and watch someone die," Isaac said quietly, "not when there was even the smallest chance I could do something to prevent it. That says more about your character than you realize." Rebecca's voice was soft now, intimate in the growing darkness. Many men would have told themselves it was too dangerous, that one life was not worth the risk, but you did not even consider that. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since that first desperate meeting in the mud and chaos. Isaac reached across the space between their chairs and took Rebecca's hand, feeling the calluses she had developed from work and the healing scrapes that were still visible on her knuckles. "I am glad I was there that day," he said. "Not just because you needed help, but because it brought you into my life." Rebecca's fingers tightened around his. "I was so frightened. The ground was just disappearing beneath me, and I knew I could not hold on much longer. Then I saw you coming toward me through all that mud and debris, and I thought you were insane." She laughed softly. "But you were the most wonderful sight I had ever seen." They sat in the comfortable silence that comes when two people understand each other beyond words, watching the stars emerge one by one across the vast Nevada sky. Mrs. Patterson came out eventually to light the lamps, giving them both a knowing look, but saying nothing as she retreated back inside. As spring turned to summer, their relationship deepened into something neither could deny. Isaac found himself planning his days around when he could see Rebecca, racing through his ranch work, so he could ride into town before she finished at the schoolhouse. Rebecca caught herself watching the road during the afternoon, her heart lifting every time she spotted a familiar figure on horseback approaching. The town of Hawthorne noticed, of course. In a small community, nothing remained private for long. There were approving nods from some of the older women, who thought it high time their young schoolteacher found herself a good husband. There were also disapproving looks from those who felt a woman in Rebecca's position should focus solely on her teaching duties without the distraction of courtship. Isaac's ranch was beginning to prosper, his hard work paying off as his herd grew, and he gained a reputation for fair dealing with the other ranchers in the area. He hired 2 hands to help with the daily work, which gave him more freedom to spend time away from the ranch. The small cabin he had built when he first arrived seemed increasingly empty now, and he found himself imagining what it might be like to share it with someone, to come home to more than just silence and solitude. One particularly hot July afternoon, Isaac took Rebecca out to see the ranch for the first time. She sat beside him in the wagon, parasol raised against the intense sun, her eyes bright with interest as he pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the land. When they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view, small but neat in the valley below, Isaac felt a surge of pride mixed with nervousness about what she would think. "It is not much yet," he said as they approached, "but I have plans to expand the cabin, add more rooms. And the water rights I have are solid, which is worth more than gold out here." Rebecca was quiet as she looked around, taking in the sturdy corral, the small barn, the cabin with its covered porch. The 2 ranch hands were working with some horses in the distance, and the whole scene had an air of purposeful activity. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it. Had some help with the barn raising, but the rest I did with my own hands." Isaac helped her down from the wagon, hyper-aware of how small her waist felt beneath his hands, how she did not immediately step away when her feet touched the ground. "It is wonderful," Rebecca said simply. "I can see how much work you have put into this place, how much of yourself. It feels like a real home." They walked around the property, Isaac pointing out his plans for future improvements while Rebecca asked intelligent questions about water management and cattle breeding. She was not afraid to get her skirts dusty or to lean against the corral fence to get a better look at the horses. When one of the ranch hands, a young man named Tom who could not have been more than 19, approached to meet her, Rebecca treated him with the same courtesy she would show anyone, asking about his family and whether he had received much education. "She is something special, boss," Tom said later when Rebecca had gone into the cabin to escape the heat for a moment. "Real quality, but without any of that uppity nonsense some refined ladies have." Isaac had to agree. Rebecca fit into his world in a way he had not expected, finding beauty in the harsh landscape and showing genuine interest in the work that consumed his days. When they sat on the porch as evening cooled the air, she did not complain about the simple meal his ranch cook had prepared or the rough furniture. Instead, she talked about how peaceful it was, how different from the constant noise and crowds of San Francisco. "I could be happy here," she said softly, almost to herself. Then she seemed to realize what she had said and looked at Isaac with something between embarrassment and defiance. "I know that might sound forward, but I believe in honesty. These past months getting to know you have been the happiest of my life. You make me feel seen in a way I never have before, like what I think and want actually matters." Isaac moved closer to her on the bench, his heart pounding. "It does matter. You matter more to me than I know how to put into words." He took her hands in his, looking directly into her eyes. "Rebecca, I love you. I have loved you since that day in the mudslide when you looked at me covered in mud and somehow still managed to laugh. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." "Yes," Rebecca breathed, her eyes shining with tears. "Yes, Isaac, I love you too. I think I have since the moment you reached through all that mud and held on when any sane person would have let go." He kissed her then, a soft press of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate as months of restrained feelings finally found release. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the stars had come out overhead, and the sounds of the night creatures filled the air around them. They married in late August, a simple ceremony in the small church in Hawthorne with most of the town in attendance. Rebecca wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Patterson and the other boarding house women had helped her make, and Isaac wore his best suit with a wildflower boutonniere that Rebecca had insisted on. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by approving ranchers, curious townspeople, and 15 very excited schoolchildren who had convinced their parents to let them attend. The school board had initially suggested Rebecca resign her position upon marriage, but she had argued successfully that there was nothing in her contract preventing a married woman from teaching. Besides, Hawthorne still desperately needed an educated teacher, and she had proven herself more than capable over the past months. It was agreed she could continue until such time as children of her own made it impractical, a compromise that satisfied most parties involved. Moving into the ranch cabin as Isaac's wife felt both surreal and completely natural to Rebecca. She threw herself into making the space a true home, adding curtains and rugs and all the small touches that transformed rough bachelor quarters into a welcoming household. Isaac would come in from long days of work to find dinner waiting and his wife eager to hear about his day, just as eager to share stories from her own work with the students. Their first winter together tested them in ways neither had fully anticipated. A harsh storm in December trapped them in the cabin for nearly a week, with snow piling so high against the door that Isaac had to dig their way out. But instead of going stir-crazy, they found they loved the forced intimacy, spending hours talking and reading and simply being together. Rebecca taught Isaac more about literature and art, while he taught her card games and told her stories from his childhood in Missouri. "I never knew it could be like this," Rebecca said one night as they lay together under thick quilts, listening to the wind howl outside. "Marriage, I mean. My parents had a cordial arrangement, but there was no real warmth between them. I thought that was just how it was." Isaac pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "My parents loved each other deeply. I was lucky enough to see what a real partnership looked like. That is what I always wanted for myself, and what I hope to find with you." "You have it," Rebecca assured him. "You have all of me, Isaac Vaughn." Spring brought new challenges as Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure, suddenly making their future feel even more real and immediate. Rebecca continued teaching through her early pregnancy, though she tired more easily and had to sit more often. The women of Hawthorne, especially those who had initially been skeptical of the young schoolteacher, rallied around her with advice and support and hand-me-down baby clothes. Isaac became almost comically protective, worrying about every little thing until Rebecca had to firmly tell him to stop fussing or she would lose her mind. But she found his concern endearing, another sign of the deep love between them. He built a cradle during the long winter evenings, carving intricate designs into the wood with painstaking care. Rebecca made tiny clothes and blankets, her hands busy even as her body grew heavy with their child. Their son was born on a warm June morning in 1879, exactly a year after that day in the mudslide. Rebecca labored through the night with Mrs. Patterson and the local midwife in attendance while Isaac paced outside, nearly wearing a trench in the ground. When he finally heard the baby's cry and was called inside to meet his child, he was stunned by the rush of love he felt for the tiny red-faced creature in Rebecca's arms. "James Isaac Vaughn," Rebecca said softly, looking between her husband and their son. "After your father, and with your name for strength." Isaac could not speak past the lump in his throat. He just knelt beside the bed and wrapped his arms carefully around his wife and new son, overwhelmed by the perfection of the moment. Rebecca did resign from teaching after all, finding that she wanted to devote her time to raising their son and managing the growing ranch household. But she did not give up education entirely. She started hosting lessons for some of the ranch children in the area whose families lived too far from town to attend school regularly, turning the ranch parlor into a makeshift classroom, 2 afternoons a week. The ranch prospered as Isaac's reputation grew. He was known as an honest dealer and a hard worker, willing to help neighbors in need and fair in his business arrangements. With Rebecca as his partner, managing the books and correspondence while he handled the physical work, they made a formidable team. They added rooms to the cabin as Isaac had always planned, transforming it into a proper ranch house that could accommodate their growing family and occasional guests. Their daughter arrived 2 years after James, a tiny perfect girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Caroline Rose, and she proved to have her mother's fierce determination from the very start. Then another son, Michael, born in 1883 with a sunny disposition that made him everyone's favorite. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing, such a different atmosphere from the quiet solitude Isaac had once known. On a warm evening in the spring of 1885, Isaac and Rebecca sat on their porch watching their 3 children play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains. 7 years had passed since that mudslide, 7 years of building a life together through hard work and love and unwavering commitment to each other. "You ever think about that day?" Rebecca asked, her hand finding Isaac's as it always did. "When you saved my life?" "All the time," Isaac admitted. "I think about what might have happened if I had been even a few minutes later on the trail, or if I had not heard your scream over the sound of the slide. How easily I could have lost you before I ever really had you." Rebecca squeezed his fingers. "But you did not. You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. I used to think it was just luck or chance, but now I wonder if maybe we were always meant to find each other, even if it took a disaster to make it happen." "Meant to be," Isaac repeated thoughtfully. "I like that idea. That all my choices, all the things that brought me to Nevada, were leading me to that moment when I could reach through the mud and hold on to the most precious thing I would ever find." Their children's laughter floated across the yard, young James helping Caroline climb the corral fence, while Michael toddled behind them with determined concentration. The ranch hands were finishing up the day's work in the distance, and from inside the house came the smell of dinner being prepared by the cook they had hired when the family grew too large for Rebecca to manage everything herself. "We have built something good here," Rebecca said softly. "Not just the ranch, but this family, this life. I wake up every morning grateful that I get to live it with you." Isaac turned to look at his wife, seeing the woman who had trusted him in her moment of greatest fear, who had chosen to build a life with him in this harsh, beautiful land. The woman who had given him children and partnership and love beyond anything he had imagined possible. "I love you, Rebecca Vaughn. I have loved you from the moment I held on and refused to let go." "And I love you," she replied, leaning into him as the last light faded from the sky. "My cowboy who saved me from the slide and gave me everything I never knew I needed." The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew into a serious boy who loved the cattle and the land as much as his father did, already talking about the day he would run the ranch himself. Caroline proved as fierce and independent as her mother, insisting on learning to ride and rope alongside her brothers, refusing to be left behind or treated as delicate. Michael was the peacemaker, always finding ways to smooth over arguments and bring harmony to any situation. A fourth child arrived in 1886, another daughter they named Grace Ann. By this time, the ranch had grown substantially, with Isaac now employing 6 full-time hands and owning enough land and cattle to be considered one of the more prosperous operations in the region. The original cabin that had seemed so spacious to a bachelor was now just one wing of a proper ranch house, expanded and improved until it stood as a testament to their success. Rebecca's unofficial school had grown as well, with children coming from as far as 10 miles away to attend her lessons. She had built a small schoolroom adjacent to the main house, equipped with proper desks and a chalkboard and shelves full of books. The territorial government eventually recognized her efforts, providing her with a small salary and official standing as an educator. She was proud of the work, proud that she had found a way to continue making a difference even while raising her own family. Isaac sometimes stood outside the schoolroom window during lessons, listening to Rebecca teach with the same passion and intelligence that had drawn him to her from the beginning. She had not lost any of her fire or determination through years of marriage and motherhood. If anything, she had grown stronger, more confident in who she was and what she could accomplish. In the fall of 1888, a fierce early storm rolled through the region, bringing memories of that long-ago mudslide flooding back for both Isaac and Rebecca. They stood together on the porch as rain lashed the house and wind tore at the trees, their children safe inside by the fire. Isaac wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, holding her close as they watched nature's fury unfold. "Are you frightened?" he asked quietly. Rebecca shook her head. "Not with you here. I know you will always keep us safe, just like you did that day. You reached through the chaos and held on, and you have never let go." "Never," Isaac promised. "I will hold on to you and our family until the day I die and beyond, if such a thing is possible." The storm passed, leaving the land washed clean and fresh. Life continued its steady march forward, bringing new challenges and new joys in equal measure. Isaac's parents came to visit from Missouri when they were finally able to make the journey, marveling at the life their son had built and falling immediately in love with their 4 grandchildren. Rebecca's younger sister made the trip from San Francisco, widowed young and looking for a fresh start. She ended up staying in Hawthorne, teaching at the town school and eventually marrying one of Isaac's ranch hands, creating an extended family network that enriched all their lives. James turned 18 in 1897, a young man now rather than a boy, ready to take on more responsibility on the ranch. Caroline was 16 and still absolutely refusing to consider any of the young men who had started showing interest, declaring she had far too much to do and learn before she would even think about marriage. Michael at 14 was working alongside his father and brother with quiet competence, while Grace Ann at 11 was already showing signs of her mother's teaching abilities by helping the younger students in Rebecca's schoolroom. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Rebecca back to the place where he had pulled her from the mudslide. The landscape had changed over the years, vegetation reclaiming the scarred earth, but they could still see where it had happened. They stood hand in hand on solid ground, looking at the slope that had nearly claimed Rebecca's life. 20 years, Rebecca said wonderingly. "It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. Do you remember what you said to me that first day after we cleaned up?" "I said you looked alive," Isaac recalled. "That it was all that mattered. It was the truest thing anyone had ever said to me. You were not concerned with how I appeared or whether I was properly behaved or any of the things I had spent my whole life worrying about. You just cared that I had survived, that I was there and breathing and whole." Rebecca turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "You taught me what really matters, Isaac. Love and family and building something meaningful with your life. The rest is just decoration." Isaac pulled her close, kissing her with the passion of a young husband and the deep, abiding love of 2 decades together. "You taught me just as much. That taking a risk on love, on partnership, on letting someone fully into your life, is the bravest and most rewarding thing a person can do. I was so alone before you. I just did not fully realize it until you showed me what it meant to have a true companion." They made love that night with tender familiarity, still finding new ways to express their love after all these years. Rebecca fell asleep in Isaac's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Isaac stayed awake longer, watching the moonlight paint silver patterns across their bedroom ceiling, thinking about the unlikely chain of events that had brought them together. If the rain had stopped even 1 day earlier, the mudslide might never have happened. If he had chosen a different route back from checking his cattle, he would not have been there to hear Rebecca's screams. If he had hesitated even a moment, she would have been swept away. So many tiny choices and chances, all aligning to create this life they now shared. But he had been there, and he had not hesitated, and he had held on when letting go would have been easier and safer. That choice, made in a split second of crisis, had given him everything that truly mattered. 20 years of love and partnership, 4 incredible children, a prosperous ranch, and a future stretching out before them still full of possibility. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, a perfect Nevada spring day. The family gathered for breakfast, the long table full of conversation and laughter as everyone talked over each other in their eagerness to share news and plans. James was heading out to check the north pasture fencing with Michael and 2 of the ranch hands. Caroline was taking Grace Ann into town for fabric shopping, already planning new dresses for both of them. Rebecca had students coming that afternoon and needed to prepare lessons. Isaac sat at the head of the table, Rebecca at his side, and looked at the life they had created together. Every person in this room existed because he had reached through the mud and held on. Every laugh and argument and moment of joy stemmed from that single act of desperate determination in the middle of a disaster. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca asked quietly, noticing his reflective expression. "Just counting my blessings," Isaac replied, squeezing her hand under the table. "And being grateful for mudslides and second chances and stubborn schoolteachers who came west to make a difference." Rebecca smiled, that same luminous smile that could still make his heart skip a beat after all these years. "And I am grateful for cowboys who are foolish enough and brave enough to run into a mudslide to save a stranger." "Not a stranger," Isaac corrected gently. "From the moment I saw you clinging to that tree, you were already mine. I just did not know it yet." The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, more joys and sorrows as they navigated life together. There would be grandchildren eventually, as James and then Caroline married and started families of their own. There would be droughts and good years, losses and triumphs, all the natural rhythms of a life well lived in partnership with the land and with each other. But through it all, Isaac and Rebecca Vaughn would hold on to each other just as tightly as they had that day in the mud and chaos. They had reached across disaster and found love, had built something lasting and true on the foundation of that desperate moment when holding on was the only thing that mattered. On quiet evenings, they would still sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the Nevada mountains, hands intertwined, comfortable in the silence of two people who knew each other completely. Sometimes they would talk about that day, remembering the fear and the determination and the strange providence that had brought them together. Sometimes they would just sit and be grateful for every moment they had been given. The ranch continued to thrive under Isaac's management and later with James as his partner. Rebecca's school remained an important part of the community, educating children who might otherwise have had no access to learning. Their children grew up strong and capable, carrying forward the values their parents had instilled through example rather than lecture. In 1910, on a warm summer evening much like the thousands they had shared before, Isaac and Rebecca celebrated their 52nd anniversary with their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren gathered around them. The ranch house that had started as a simple cabin now sprawled across the valley, additions and improvements marking each stage of their growing family. Isaac was 73 now, his hair silver and his face weathered by decades of sun and wind. Rebecca was 71, her beauty transformed but not diminished by age, her mind still sharp and her spirit still fierce. They sat together in the places of honor, as their family celebrated the love story that had started in a mudslide and grown into something neither could have imagined in those early desperate moments. James stood to give a toast. His own children gathered around him. To my parents, who taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every single day. That building a life together means working through the hard times and celebrating the good times, and never letting go even when it would be easier to give up. You showed us what commitment really means, and we are all better for it. Caroline added her own words, her voice thick with emotion. You taught me that I could be strong and independent and still find love with someone who would value those qualities instead of trying to diminish them. That a real partnership means bringing out the best in each other, not demanding someone change who they are. Michael spoke of stability and trust, of parents who had always been there through every childhood crisis and adult challenge. Grace Ann, now a teacher herself following in her mother's footsteps, talked about the importance of education and community service that she had learned watching Rebecca work with students for decades. When it was time for Isaac and Rebecca to respond, they stood together as they always did, his arm around her waist, her hand on his shoulder. Isaac spoke first, his voice still strong despite his years. When I pulled your mother from that mudslide 52 years ago, I thought I was just saving a life. I had no idea I was saving my own life in the process. Rebecca gave me purpose and love and a family I treasure beyond measure. She turned a lonely ranch into a home, and she made every day an adventure worth living. Rebecca's turn came, and she looked out at the gathered family with eyes that still sparkled with intelligence and humor. Your father is the finest man I have ever known. He is brave and kind and steadfast in ways both large and small. He has held on to me through half a century of life, just as tightly as he did in those first desperate moments in the mud. I could not have asked for a better partner in this grand adventure of life. They kissed to enthusiastic applause and more than a few tears from the assembled family. The celebration continued long into the night, with stories and laughter and the deep contentment that comes from being surrounded by people you love who love you in return. Isaac and Rebecca slipped away eventually, walking together through the evening air to their favorite spot on the porch. They sat in the same chairs they had occupied for decades, holding hands and watching the familiar stars emerge across the vast Nevada sky. No regrets. Isaac asked, a question they had asked each other countless times over the years. Not a single one, Rebecca replied firmly. You Only that I wish I could do it all over again, exactly as it happened." Isaac lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The mudslide, the fear, the desperate reach through the mud, the holding on. Every moment that brought us here to this perfect life. Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder, fitting perfectly into the space that seemed made just for her. "We held on, my love. Through everything, we held on." "Always," Isaac promised, his voice steady and sure in the darkness. "I will always hold on." And he did, until his last breath many years later, and beyond, in the legacy of love and family and steadfast devotion he left behind. The story of the cowboy who saved the schoolteacher from a mudslide became legend in Hawthorne, passed down through generations, as an example of true love found in the most unlikely circumstances. But for Isaac and Rebecca Vaughn, it was simply their truth, the foundation of a life well lived together in the wild and beautiful land they both called home.